Let me introduce our speaker and turn it over to him. Over the last 3 decades, Stephen Graff has worn just about every hat in the Marcom agency business: media buyer, copywriter, PPC manager, creative director, account director, information architect, program director, VP of operations, and CEO. As Director of Optimization, Stephen focuses on adding to his understanding of user behavior and motivation in nearly every market sector to address the problem of conversion optimization throughout the customer journey. A key driver in his testing and success is moving beyond a marketer's intuition and proving winning strategies that are informed by digital analytics. Stephen.
Well, I've never had that read aloud, so now I know that it's really just like over the top. I'm looking around the room and I see that there are people who clearly have as much experience as me. This is a really big topic. I'm going to try and cover as much ground as I can in the window of time I have. Like all good consultants, I have a deck bigger than the time allotted. So if I'm moving too fast or too slow, let me know if you do not mind. I'm trying to present it from a perspective that we have some guiding ideas on how to get the most out of the tool. I knew that there would be a variety of folks and experiences with the tool, so I'll try to do my best. And thank you for inviting me in. It's not very often I get this opportunity. So let me, if I go ahead and present, and then I'll share my screen. Let me know if you can see that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, looks good.
All right.
Yeah.
So just briefly, I'm going to try and cover a lot because a key component of getting the top things out of it is making sure it's set up right. A PSA before we begin around metrics and what we're doing, whether it's Google Analytics or you're using Adobe's suite, metrics really should be in the service of understanding our customer. It's very easy to get buried in the numbers because the tool is so powerful. So we want to make sure that whatever we're measuring, it has meaning to us, and specifically in that it informs, it allows us to make a decision that should be actionable. What Google Analytics can do is it can remove guesswork. It can help make data-driven decisions. It can improve user understanding. It can confirm or disprove performance or a hypothesis around a test. And it can identify opportunities. And I've used it for all of these things on a regular basis. As many of you said, you don't know, you're not really clear on what would be the right thing to do, what to look at. In online metrics, there are two general pools of information, of data. And when I say metrics, and I'll probably use KPIs at some point today, metrics are those individual elements that can be tracked via the tool. There are things that are vanity metrics, which are, it's a nice data point, but it doesn't really inform our decision making. Examples of this are, that are very popular are things like the number of followers or the unique visitors or the device type. These by themselves are not of much use. We can't really make a decision with them, but they're very often used by consultants to hide a lack of performance. So when they're not tied to something that is related to a business or marketing objective, they tend just to be data points that we can, that can bury us and provide no information. What we're really after when we set up an analytics state is that we're after data for decision making, so we can increase the ROI or make our efforts, whether it's marketing dollars or time available. So, examples of this are cart transactions or referral traffic from sites that we paid money to be on, or things like a conversion rate from visitors coming to the site.
So Steve, before you move on, can you try resharing the screen? The
Sure.
slide is taking up about 10% of the screen area.
Sure. Let me escape. And let's see.
I always hear Shark Tank talk about conversion rate. So if you could elaborate, that'd be just
I sure can.
itch to scratch.
For some reason, it's in a portrait mode where the slide is very small.
Okay, let's go back to the Zoom console.
Can you make it full screen, maybe?
I've moved to a different screen.
Okay.
So hang on.
When you choose a window to share in Zoom, it's using the dimensions of the window. So if you make if you make the window wide and short before you share it, that's what should show up on the screen.
There we go.
Okay. Hopefully this is big enough.
Yep. It's better.
So, and how about now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm going to back up just one slide, I think, here. So conversion rate, I will talk more about, but specifically, this is the number of visitors, the number of people taking the action you want them to the number of visitors that have arrived, or the number of visitors that are on the page. Google Analytics is part of an ecosystem, and one of the cool things about it is that it's free, and in marketing and especially in technology, you'll hear a lot of people talk about their technology stack. The same thing is now happening in marketing, and you now have CMOs who are pretty much acting like having to take on or at least wear a hat part-time of a CIO or CTO, or in some cases, the CMO is being canned and it's being taken over by the CTO or CIO. Because the technology is so much of what digital marketing and marketing is today. So the Google platform makes it possible. I think the key thing about this is that it makes it possible for a David or a Goliath to be a formidable digital marketer on the cheap. It includes Google Analytics, Google Ads, Google Search Console, the Optimizer, which is a testing tool, Google Trends, which is about understanding Google behavior, Tag Manager, which is a way to deploy all of these elements, and other marketing tools without having to use a developer. You can actually, you put a string of code in the site, and then that string of code makes a call to other servers to pull in the rest of the information. And Google's Data Studio is a way to visualize that data, all that data that you're collecting in a way that makes sense. 65% of all websites use Google Analytics. 51% of Fortune 500 use Google Analytics in some form or another, whether it's paid or free. Here, this deck I will, that I'll share later. These are all of the links to get those resources for on-site behavior, search behavior. These abbreviations are for Google Analytics, Google Search Console, Optimize, GTM. So I don't spend much time on that. Just know that they are there, and if they are linked together, you have a more powerful tool. Just another brief moment here that I just mentioned, that Google Tag Manager. Those of you who are in web development or in technology will understand the concept of a tag managing tool, in which we take much of the code that would be added to a page to gain insight or generate data around the user, is shifted outside of the site to help make the page lighter and to improve the user experience. It also has the advantage of, as non-technical folks, we can make changes or we can add tags within the tool, the tag manager, and then they'll be injected into the site, and we don't have to bother a webmaster. In large enterprises, working on the website can be considered, can be a pretty low priority if they are also involved in managing things like cloud computing and a whole slew of other technology demands. So Briefly, I want to talk about configuring GA just to get it so it's working well for you or getting the most out of it. GA from here on out, the short for Google Analytics. One of the things that you're going to want to do once you've signed up for a Google Analytics account and have identified your website is you're going to want to create what are called properties or multiple properties. Google Analytics has now got 2 versions. I know there's a question about what's happening with Google Analytics and where they're going. Just briefly, the reason we want to create multiple properties is because Google data is, once it's filtered, it's no longer, you can no longer recover the data that's been filtered out. The other thing that goes on is that Google will only allow Google starts collecting data just from the day we create the site. So the first thing you'll want to do is create multiple properties. One for Google version 3, Google Analytics version 3, which is what most people probably are already using. It's been around for a number of years. It's very mature. It's very powerful. And it is really about understanding user behavior on the site. The newest version that Google is pushing us towards is called GA4 or Google version 4. And its goal is to understand attribution. What is bringing the people to the website, and what can we attribute to the conversion or the sale or the gathering of a lead. The thing about this is that Google cannot collect historic data. It can only collect it from the day that you set up the account and install it on your property. Along with properties are something called views. And each property can have multiple views. All of these I'm showing here in the screen from the admin. You want to create multiple views, again, for the same reason that if you filter data, you've lost it forever. The other thing is, again, that it cannot transfer data from one view to the other. So what I generally recommend people do is whenever they set up a new website or whenever they install Google Analytics, they create one view called Do Not Filter or Raw, so that whoever gets into the analytics, whoever you might grant access to, they don't filter that. But you can always look at it by adding segments, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So what you can see here is I've just basically, when I went into this website, I just made a copy of the initial set and then made another copy of that so that we could go back and in the future, I can filter that or create segments. The other limitation of Google is that we're going to talk about creating goals. Each view is only permitted to have 20 goals. So if you have a business that maybe you have if you're in e-commerce, maybe you have one of it is service and another part of it is product. You may want to create a set of goals around each service type or each product type, and having multiple views allows you to do that. The other thing that we can do with these views is we can also add filters to them that will get rid of data. So there are instances where we might not want to have data attributed to the account, attributed to the Google Analytics. An example of this would be your own computer. One of the first things you would want to do is filter out your own IP address so that if you have a small traffic site and you tend to be the kind of person who's always looking at your site or referencing it when making a sales presentation, your behavior will not be factored into those analytics, so that it's not skewing the understanding of what's happening on your website. Here is an admin screen for version 3. You can see that there's a lot to work with here. That account is something that I just want to briefly talk about there. The most important thing in that column in the account is the account and user management. If you are a consultant deploying a Google Analytics account for folks, you're going to want to make sure that you create users for the client so that they are also able to manage units. If you are working with someone else who's setting up a Google Analytics account for you, you want to make sure that they make it possible for you to manage users. The reason being is that because this data can't be replicated, if it is being held hostage by a third party, it creates all sorts of problems. So my approach whenever I work with clients is I make sure I understand either whether they want a role-based user or they want an individual in their organization to be given the ability to add and remove users. And that takes place under the account user management there in the first column. This is, let's see if it will load anyway. Nope. All right. What this slide is that has gone missing is just the interface for version 4. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on. So there are key settings whenever you go into an account, your account. There are a couple of key things you want to make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's on. One is what I mentioned there around user management. The other is there are 2 places within Google Analytics to set, the admin to set whether you are what the default URL is, whether you're using the domain name, which is your, for example, stevegraff.com, whether I'm using www.stevegraff.com or whether it's just stevegraff.com. You want to make sure you specify that correctly in the default URL. The other thing you want to do is you want to specify whether it's a secure server or not. And just right off the top, I would say make sure that, if you can, get into an HTTPS environment because Google Search wants you to have a secured site, an SL certificate. You can set your industry category, and the reason you would want to do that is because you could then see benchmarks against other sites in that same category. You can set site search tracking, which is the ability within for you to see what's happening when people use search on your site. So if your site has a search feature, then this would allow you to see the terms that people are searching on. And that's very useful for understanding whether you might have navigation issues. Like if you know that something is on a menu, but people are constantly searching for it, then that would be an indication that it's not labeled very well. It also is a great resource for those who are building a website or for working with clients who need content. That internal site search data is a great repository for topics that would be suitable for having content built around. This also is a good clue to what might be useful for search engine optimization. There are filters. We talked a little bit about that just a moment ago, in which you can add filters. And the thing I would recommend you do right off the bat is to add an internal filter to get rid of internal traffic. I work with one organization, and they do a monthly update where they pass around a spreadsheet to all of their internal team to make sure that they have a current IP address. This has been really important underneath COVID situations where everyone is involved in, pretty much coming to work via Zoom. So there is a large number of IPs that are visiting your own website and being tracked as a normal user, which they're not. If you are involved in e-commerce, you'll want to make sure you activate the e-commerce component. Within Google, there is the ability to add goals, and this would be something related to conversion rate. And the other thing is there's some other things that you can add annotations, alerts, emails, and then you can link Search Console. I want to talk briefly about the Search Console. Search Console is another tool, free tool from Google Analytics. And what it's really cool about is it measures what happens before visitors land on your website. I have a resource link to this. You sign up for it with the same ID you would use for your Google Analytics. And then within Google Analytics, you link to your console. And that way you can get an idea of what pages, where pages are ranking and what percentage of the search traffic your pages are being exposed to, and what the click-through rate, the number of people clicking on the listing on Google search that come through to your site. This is also super important when you are if you are involved in search engine optimization and you're writing content, you can understand whether or not the changes you've made are having an impact on that. It looks a little bit like this. This is what this screen would look like. So let's get into Google Analytics. There's a lot that can go on there. What it's measuring is what happens on your site, not what happens before it's on the site. So you can look and see what's happening real time, and that real time information is within 30 seconds. You can actually you can visit your site, click on something, and you can watch it march across the screen as to what's happening. And so in this instance, I'm showing a website in which at this moment in time, there are 151 visitors on the site right then and there. We can look at audience, acquisition, behavior, and conversions. And I'm very quickly going to run through a lot of the data here. This is just to illustrate how much information is in there, and probably why you're on this call today is that there's just so much to look at under acquisition, like top channels, looking at behavior. We can see what pages people looked at. We can look at how fast the site is is loading. We can look at site search that I was just recently talking about. We can look at events, what sort of things took place on the site, and we can look at the publishing information. Here's an example of a Google Data Studio screen that's looking at, Google Analytics as seen through Data Studio. I mentioned that earlier as part of the stack that can provide better visualization. So we can look at things like how many page views took place in the month or the day. We can see how many of them were unique. We're seeing a difference there. You see page views and unique page views. Those unique page views represent an individual user, whereas page views would also capture pages a user had seen more than once. We can look at average time on the page, bounce rate, and conversion. We can look at whether the goals are event-based or whether they're e-commerce based. We can also look at user behavior to understand how conversion is taking place. So 5 top things to track within GA. Acquisition. We want to understand where people are coming from. So in other words, performance by channel. So just as a review, organic search represents someone, and this is sometimes called natural search. This would be anyone using a search engine to arrive at your site. Direct traffic would be anyone putting in your URL. It could also, in recent years, what's happened is that if you are familiar with another free service from Google called Google My Business, if you have a Google My Business account, traffic coming from your listing on that Google search results would show up as direct. Another thing that's happened is that with Google Autocomplete, if a visitor has gone to your site before, and they are the type of person who, instead of going to Google to search, starts typing your URL in their address bar, that autocomplete, if they click on it, will show as direct traffic. Social would be any traffic coming from social media. It's kind of obvious. Referral would be anyone clicking on a link on a different site and arriving on your site. Paid search is showing up here. If you had an email program, that would also be showing up. So it allows us to look at things like the performance by channel, where the traffic is sourcing, the click-through rate, engagements, and conversions. You can find this through Google by going to the acquisition menu and clicking on overview. The other thing we can look at is engagement. you should be looking at this because we want to understand new users. Now, new users versus returning users, it depends on the kind of business you're in. So for example, if you are working in the kind of business that sells leads, say a lending tree, new users is really important to your lifeblood. If you are creating a blog, or you are in the business of selling advertising space, rather than new users, what you would be most interested in is returning users, because that would indicate whether or not you are building an audience. The number of, instead of so much about sessions, worrying so much about sessions, the number of sessions per user would be important, because that's again telling you how sticky your site is. The pages per session is a good indication of whether your content is engaging. It also is a great indication of whether or not the user is involved in some sort of information gathering process. Time on site, or average session duration, is important, because if they're not finding what they're after, that's going to be very short. I've worked with clients who they set a goal where the pages per session was considered a conversion. So their 3+ pages was considered a conversion. The problem with that is that if a visitor sees 3+ pages in less than 15 seconds, that's not truly a conversion. They're not actually gathering information. They're more of a lost soul, or they're dealing with navigation that doesn't make sense to them. Bounce rate, and I'll just quickly talk on this because this is a common question. Bounce rate refers to someone coming to the page and not taking any action. So what's happened, it would be, a bounce rate of 90% would say that only 10% of the people coming on that page actually found anything relevant. 90% of them said, no, I'm not here. There's nothing here that makes sense to me, and I'm gone. The one change that's happened in the last year, as many of us are dealing with privacy, we'll have privacy pop-ups on our sites, and the clicking of a privacy pop-up counts as interaction with a page. So there are instances I've seen in which a site has a 0% bounce rate. In all likelihood, if you're looking at your analytics or a client's analytics and it's saying you have a 0% bounce rate, there is probably some sort of pop-up the user is required to engage with before they can see what's on the page. News sites like New York Times or The Gate that only allow a certain number of visits before they will make every visitor buy a subscription, their bounce rates are going to be highly skewed. The other thing is that a bounce rate approximating 50% is average, but you need to understand is that anything, it's not until we get below 30% that we can sort of assume that we have done a great job of addressing the issues on the page that are interfering with the user experience. So if you're running an ad campaign and it's driving traffic to the site and you're seeing a bounce rate of 90%, that's not uncommon, but that's a good indication that the ad copy you have is not aligned with the content on the page. So for example, if you have an ad promoting a service and you'd send them to your home page and you have a bounce rate of 90%, that's pretty common. You need to be thinking about where, from that ad, what's the continuity? What are people after? So engagement, again, is a good way of understanding whether or not our site is meeting our users' expectations or helping them move along the information journey or the user journey. The other really useful report, I think, that I want to encourage you to look at is the landing page report, and this can be found in the behavior, under behavior in the site content and under landing pages. What this report is super helpful in helping us understand is the real point of entry and whether they are driving people into the site. we can see the pages per visit, the duration, and the bounce rate. And I'll talk about this. Here is a second one. There are, within Google Analytics, it's really easy to get what I call banner blindness. There's so many choices on the page that you don't necessarily see what you're being presented in the way of options to slice and dice the data. And so leverage the tools that leverage these filters to gain insight as to what's happening. So these two arrows are pointing that Google allows you to display your data, in a tabular form, pie charts, but it also has a really powerful tool that will allow you to do comparative data within your own site. So you can use this to identify the winners and losers on your site. And same thing here is that related to that is the ability to use the full pull down menu, and you can set it by conversion rate, revenue, bounce rate, all of this information, and you can then identify which pages on your site need some TLC and which pages on your site need to be emulated across the rest of the site.
David, we have a question on referrals. So does the referral option provide a list of referring sites?
Yes. What I'm coming up here, I think it probably will make sense for me to bring up a Google Analytics state so we can navigate through there. But yes, it gives you a list of the individual sites that drove. You can sort by source and type. Does that answer the question, David?
Yep, thank you.
All right. This is a really great report. This is the user flow, and this is found underneath audience and user flow. A lot of people have really never even seen how users are interacting with their site. One more thing I want to make sure to mention about landing pages. I do have it in a bullet point here, the real point of entry. A lot of people still rely on that paradigm or that metaphor that a home page is the front door of a website. It just isn't the case, and that has been the case for a decade. Because of search engines, your site is more like Swiss cheese or a screen door. Every page can be the entry point, and that's why this landing page report is super important in that this default ASP that's being shown in this example, that is a home page, but I've seen many sites in which the top landing page is not the home page. This is a great report, again, because it allows you to see the flow of users as they come to your site. It shows where drop-off is. It shows where you may have problems. It shows, in a sense, we're seeing the way users, the majority of users gain information on our site. I've indicated some arrows here. This segment on top of every Google page is this segment component, where you can see here we have a blue circle that says all users. We can use the add segment to populate it with a bunch of pre-existing filters or that we can then look at, say, for example, how do people arriving from search navigate through our site? Or how do people arriving via social media navigate through our site? The other thing that you can do within this report is if you click on the page name here, for example, where it says that arrow is pointing to default ASP, you can change that page and then see how traffic goes through that page, how it arrives, which page on the website is driving traffic to that page, where are they going next? So, if we have a theory about user behavior, or we have a page that we're trying to understand how are people coming to it and what are they thinking, so that we can then modify our call to action or the thing that we're prompting them to do. It's really powerful in that respect.
So we have a question. So the statement is probably most of the consultants have a low traffic site that's not trying to sell something online. Which of these analytics would be most useful for that situation?
Landing page.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Landing page, and then this one, conversions. And this goes back to probably the beginning of the conversation or the beginning of the presentation, which is, what is it we're trying to achieve with the website? What business, you know, as a consultant, the thing I ask when I go in is what's the business objective you're trying to achieve with this website, and what are the marketing communication objectives you're trying? Because that is how we then build or use Google Analytics to answer those questions and support traffic. In order for good conversions to work, though, you have to set up goals. And just along with this, just like we can look at page flow, we can also look at flow for the goal. So what pages, and we can specify the number of, if there are quite a number on larger sites, you may be able to look at 5 or 6 levels of pages people come through. We can look by source here. These pull-down menus make it really powerful. So this is not necessarily, for example, the question around if we're not e-commerce or we're not selling anything, submitted a request for an RFQ, submitted an estimate, or wanted to make content. These goals can be tracked as conversions as well. So here's some additional tips I want to add to this. Within Google Analytics, you have the ability to create dashboards and reports. And that can be daunting in itself. But within this tool here, you can actually, if you click on Create, you'll have the option to choose from a whole number of pre-existing dashboards, which will provide, other consultants have built to help you understand your business. The other thing is the Data Studio. Google has now integrated, I should say, Data Studio reports. So these are reports that have been built by others that allow you to very quickly generate data visualization so you can get a better understanding of what's happening. The other thing is that make use of reporting. You can have saved reports. They can be, you can schedule them to come to you. So one of the challenges with Google Analytics is, it takes a while to get an understanding and become, build a dashboard or build a report that makes sense to you. Each of those reports can be saved, and then you can set them up to be sent to any email, whether it's you or it's a client, so that you don't have to come to Google Analytics and navigate to that report every single time. It can just come to your inbox. So if you're busy, or if you need to promote the efforts that you're doing on behalf of a client, you can have these go out on a time basis and let them know what is the latest status. I also would encourage you to make use of the annotation feature. And a lot of people don't realize that this is there. Underneath each of these graphs, that Google has is a little drawer that you can click on, and you can create a new annotation. And in this example, I'm capturing all sorts of information related to externalities, things that happen that we don't have control over. Like, for example, in the last year, we had a pandemic, and that affected a lot of people's business. 3 years from now, we may not remember when the CDC shut down, basically inside activities. or when they reopened. I've had clients working with them, and we thought we were doing fantastic. They were in the test equipment business, and they had some products that were about measuring hydrocarbons, and we started working with them in SEO, and we thought we were doing fantastic. You know, traffic was up 800%. Until we looked at where those occurrences took place, and it just so happened that it was with the Horizon derrick in the Gulf of Mexico. So we didn't, it was important to capture that so we knew why these spikes were taking place. So anytime that you make a change to your website, anytime that you start an ad campaign, anytime that there is something that affects your business, whether it be a competitor launching a new website or launching a new product or appearing on a media, if you have a chance to talk in front of someone or there's a trade show, all of those things should be you can capture that here so that when you go back and analyze the data and you are asked why something took place, you'll have some information in here. This is also a great way to track the number of days an email, if you're using an email campaign, where things, tapered off from an email, because you can filter, again, by traffic source. I encourage people to tag everything you do by using a UTM code. And this is a tool that allows you to basically create a link that you can use that carries a code string that helps you identify within Google Analytics what that was. And this tool will generate that URL for you that you can then add as a link to an email or to your Google My Business listing or to your social media posts. You can actually get specific around that and then slice and dice your data within Google Analytics to do that. As it relates to goals, always set a value for goals. The reason being is that if everything is worth the same to us, then how do we set priorities on where to put our limited time and resources? So Google Analytics will let you, when you create a goal, set a value for that. It'll only let you use whole integers. If you don't have the math around lifetime value of a customer, or you're not in don't have an e-commerce setting, you can use a weighted approach. So for example, someone clicking on the phone number is worth $3. Someone signing up for a newsletter is worth $1. So then you can then look at and value what activities should warrant your time, or where you should be spending money. As I mentioned, you can segment data within Google Analytics. And again, this is a way of creating filters or using filters to get a deeper understanding, because really the learning in Google Analytics comes when you can compare data. Looking at a specific point in time or a specific metric doesn't really tell you anything unless you can compare it to a different point in time or a different segment or a different channel. So then around, and I think the last tip here is that, goals should be planned. So in other words, if we're going to create a measurement, we want to make sure that we develop a plan on how we're going to deploy it on the site. We want to make sure that if we're going to measure something, that it's related to an indicator that changes our business. We can define that around how those goals are pushing people towards that transaction, which is another way of describing a conversion. And so this online metrics has a great tutorial on that, and I've had that link within here as well. It helps you understand how to set up goals within Google Analytics. Finally, around the business type, If you are in the information business, the metrics that you probably are going to care most about are the source and the medium, levels of engagement, the pages per session, subscriptions. So I find this is a helpful construct for folks in determining what indicators are best for their business. I think that,
Well,
yeah,
this has
I'm
been
ready.
very good. Should we throw it open to questions? Folks have
Yes,
questions?
please, because I know we're up against the time here, and I hope there was something of merit for somebody for each of you.
So there's a question, can you share your link slide again so we can screenshot it? And you're also going to make the slides available, so we'll send a note out about that.
Yes, I will. Hang on just a moment. I'll share that again.
Oh, perfect.
Got it.
Well, any other questions for Stephen?
I'll mention that it's certainly inspiring to learn. You know, sometimes I design a website, you know, you just think of the standard stuff and you don't really, you know, you think you know the person's business, but I can see how Google Analytics could give a lot of information as to a website redesign or even just enhancing the website that's already there.
Cool.
Yeah,
Looks like, go ahead.
That landing page report can also be sliced on all pages. It doesn't have to be landing pages, so you can look at, you know, all content for the site and find problem children
Looks
that
like
need
Bob,
some. Go ahead.
Bob Giuliano has a question.
Yes, Bob.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned it earlier. There's just so much behind what's going on with Google Analytics, like all the different reports and dashboards, and you click on this, and then there's 8 layers below that, and each of those layers had another 14 layers below that. It's just, you use the word daunting, and it is daunting. I mean, there's a ton of stuff on there. First, thank you for kind of simplifying it so we can focus on just a few things. But if we want to learn more about this, what is the best way to tackle that? Is it to just dive in and do it ourselves, or is there a kind of course or online video series or something that you might want to recommend?
Right. There are, you know, I think that the second largest search engine in the world has been a tremendous resource for me, and that is YouTube.
YouTube, yeah.
Right. So, you know, if you have a specific element that you want to measure on your website, typing how to measure X, there is literally a tutorial for everything there.
Cool. We have a question for Tom Roberts.
Yeah.
On the tags, I'm totally confused. I put an ad in LinkedIn, and it had a special tag, and then there's general tags used with Google Analytics. Could you point us to anything that would help us explain and get a better understanding of that?
Sure, I can include that in the deck that I send off. Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Stephen Holloman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephen, for going through all this. I did ask a question, but instead of saying it to everyone, I sent it to you. What is the total cost for Google Analytics generally? And for example, toward the end, I think you said there's so much charge for click on this and so much charge for click on that. Where is the pricing schedule?
So for Google Analytics, it's a free tool.
It's what?
It's free.
Well, but you indicated a few moments ago that if you wanted to clicks on a telephone number or clicks on directions or something like that, there's a charge.
No, within Google Analytics and within Google Ads, yes, there are charges for those, and those are based upon the auction price. Other people competing on that. Within your website, using Google Analytics, you can track clicks on your page or clicks on the elements, and there's no cost for that, other than the time it takes to set it up. But there's no ongoing cost for that. The only way, at this point, Google makes money very few ways. And the reason that these tools are free is because Google wants as many people building websites so that they can sell advertising as possible. And so their primary source of income has always been their ad products. They're now building a marketing suite, and this is from the outside. I am not affiliated with Google. They're building a marketing suite that they're charging for, that I think the intent is to compete with Adobe and some of the others who are charging for enterprise class analytics solutions.
We have a question from Carl Angotti.
The only thing I mentioned is earlier when it first started, the only thing that confuses me is it says, I'll look on Google Analytics. I do all this in my head. I don't use, and they give you a few dashboards, but I find that what you presented would be wonderful if I were doing this all day for a living, but it probably not as helpful. But there's one that will say no link available or link unknown or something like that when you get a referral, someone coming to your site. Why is that occurring, that I'm not getting that link? What's the problem?
Most of the time, it's a configuration problem if it's a link that you've set up, or if it's a link that they have set up, it is a configuration issue on the serving, the link serving side of it.
No, I'm not clear what you mean, but yeah, could you explain it? That's really something that's puzzled me for several years now. In that it says, I'm not going to tell you who came to your site. I'm not going to give you their what's it called? Your IP address. I'm not going to give it to you. Yep. Instead it says unknown. Now, why are they not giving it to me? What's the reason?
Well, Google has become
that's policy. That's policy. That's not a misconfiguration. That's just flat out policy.
Yeah.
That's how they work.
That part of it's policy, yes.
Now, what does that mean, policy?
They're not going to give it to you. They're not going to give it to you.
It really comes down to privacy.
That's it.
Oh, I see. Okay. So why would someone do that? Is it something I should be concerned about, that I have a bunch of unknown links?
No.
No.
Oh, okay.
You have to use different tools if you want to get the IP address of the people that are visiting.
I see.
You can't use Google Analytics. That's the net.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Stephen? Well, I want to thank you all for coming. I think we'll break here. This has been the PATCA lunch briefing on Google Analytics. Quite a bit of material. We'll make the deck and the presentation available.